The evening sun poured its last rays over Red Mesa Ranch, painting the vast Texas plains molten gold. The sky seemed heavy with silence, as if nature held its breath in anticipation of the decision that weighed on one man's shoulders. Cole Ramirez stood at the edge of the wide wooden porch of his ranch house, his tall frame rigid, his weathered hands curled into fists against the railing. He was a man who had seen drought, storms, and the loss of friends across 40 years of ranching. Yet nothing had ever pressed down on him quite like this. His gaze never left the farthest paddock. There, beneath the shadow of the cottonwoods, the chestnut stallion known as Tempest prowled the ground in restless circles. Muscles rippled under his gleaming coat, and his eyes blazed with a light that unsettled even the hardest men on the ranch. Tempest was beautiful and terrifying, a creature carved of fire and fury. He had been brought to Red Mesa 3 months before, a prize from a horse trader who swore he was bred from noble stock. Yet since the day he set foot on this land, Tempest had been nothing but a storm waiting to break. Cole had tried everything. He had called in Buck, the famed cowboy who had never met a bronc he couldn't break, and watched as the proud man was driven straight out of the pen by Tempest's flashing hooves. He had asked Diego, his most trusted foreman, a man who bore scars from decades of taming wild horses, and still the stallion threw him down with merciless power. Even Dr. Patel, the veterinarian whose calm hands could soothe the most skittish creature, had come away defeated, narrowly escaping injury. Tempest had reduced them all to caution and silence. He was untouchable. Behind Cole, the screen door creaked as Marisol stepped onto the porch. She had grown up on this land, as he had, and together they had built not just a ranch, but a life that pulsed with sweat, sacrifice, and memory. Her dark hair, streaked with gray now, caught the evening light as she came to stand beside him. She followed his gaze to the paddock, where Tempest stopped his circling, only to strike the ground with one hoof, sending a spray of dirt into the air. "You cannot give up on him," Marisol said softly. Cole's jaw tightened. "Tomorrow, by noon, Doctor, Patel will be here. It has to end." The words scraped against his throat, heavy with a finality he did not want to accept. He could hear the disbelief in Marisol's sigh. She knew as well as he did what it meant. Putting down a horse was always hard, but it was more than that for Cole. It was a failure, a mark on a record of 30 years where he had always found a way. Always, until now. He rubbed a hand over his tired eyes. "I will not let another man be injured. Not Diego, not Buck, not anyone. That horse is too dangerous." Marisol touched his arm, her voice carrying the quiet steel of someone who knew the land and its lessons. "You have saved worse, Cole. I have seen you pull broken creatures back from the edge. You have found a way before." His gaze stayed fixed on Tempest. The stallion had lifted his head high, his nostrils flaring, ears pricked forward as if he was also listening, waiting for judgment. In the dying light, his body gleamed like burnished copper, proud and unyielding. Cole saw it then, the nobility beneath the rage. The horse was not just wild, he was something else, something larger, something untamed that demanded reverence. And that made the choice harder still. Diego appeared at the foot of the porch, his hat in his hand, his eyes reluctant. "Boss, maybe one more try, just one more before noon?" Cole shook his head sharply. "No more risks. We have tried a dozen times. He cannot be saved." Diego hesitated, then fell silent, knowing better than to argue. The ranch hands who lingered near the barn whispered quietly, their faces drawn. They all knew what was coming, and yet none of them looked comfortable with it. Tempest let out a sudden snort that rolled across the paddock like a challenge, and every man in the yard stiffened. The stallion reared high, his hooves slicing at the air, his cry echoing through the twilight. For a moment, it seemed he was mocking them all, daring them to come closer. Then, with a violent shake of his mane, he landed and went back to his circling, as if he knew his time was short, but refused to bow to it. Marisol's voice was quiet, but it carried enough to cut through Cole's brooding. Sometimes fate waits until the very last moment to show its hand. "Do not close the door too soon." Cole did not answer. He could not. He felt the truth of her words pressing against the stone of his resolve. But he had lived too many years to put faith in whispers of fate. Still, as the last light drained from the horizon and the stars began to scatter themselves across the sky, he could not tear his eyes away from Tempest. Something about the way the stallion held himself, alone, fierce, untouchable, gnawed at him. The night deepened. The ranch settled into silence, but Cole remained where he was, rooted to the porch. Marisol eventually slipped back inside, the soft glow of lamplight spilling through the window. Diego disappeared into the bunkhouse, and the hands went off to their rest. Yet Cole stayed, staring across the distance at the restless shadow that refused to be tamed. Tempest halted for a moment, his head turning toward the house, his ears flicking as though he could feel the weight of Cole's gaze. Their eyes met across the darkness, man and beast, both proud, both stubborn, both unwilling to yield. In that fleeting connection, Cole felt the faintest tremor in his certainty. Perhaps Marisol was right. Perhaps fate had not yet spoken its last word. But dawn would come soon enough, and with it, the final hour. The dawn crept across Red Mesa Ranch with the silence of a predator, long shadows stretching over the fields as the ranch hands gathered near the barn. Their faces were drawn, their movements heavy, each of them unwilling to say aloud what they all knew. By noon, Dr. Patel would arrive, and Tempest's time would end. No one wanted to see it happen, yet no one had the courage to challenge Cole Ramirez's decision. A stallion that powerful, that violent, was a danger to every man who dared step near him. Cole descended the porch steps with a grim set to his jaw, his boots thudding hard against the earth. Marisol followed him with quiet eyes, her presence steady but filled with sorrow. He looked toward the far paddock where Tempest still paced like a restless spirit, copper mane catching the pale morning light. Even now, on the edge of his fate, the stallion carried himself like a king whose throne could never be stolen. It made Cole's heart ache with a grief he could not show. The silence broke with an unexpected sound. A metallic clatter carried up the dirt road, sharp and uneven, as though the old machine that bore it was fighting for its life. Every head turned. Dust curled into the air, and from it emerged a boy on a rusted bicycle, its frame crooked, its chain squealing in protest. The sight of him was so strange, so out of place on this somber morning, that the ranch hands stared in disbelief. The boy rode straight into the yard, leapt from the bike before it had even stopped rolling, and stood facing Cole with a look that was far too certain for one so young. He could not have been more than 8, thin as a reed, his patched jeans and faded shirt speaking of poverty. A cowboy hat, too large for his small head, shaded eyes that gleamed with a strange fire. "Sir," the boy said, his voice clear despite the quiet, "are you the owner of this ranch?" Cole frowned, startled but composed. "I am." "You lost, boy?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir, I came for the horse." The ranch yard erupted with murmurs. Diego raised his brows in disbelief. Buck snorted a laugh that carried no humor. But the boy did not waver. His small fists clenched at his sides, and he stood as though he belonged there. Cole narrowed his eyes. "What horse?" "The chestnut in the far paddock," the boy replied, steady as stone. "The one nobody can tame. His name is Tempest. I can help him." A ripple of unease passed through the men. Diego spat into the dirt. "Kid, that horse nearly killed me." Put Buck flat on his back. "You think you can do better?" The boy turned his gaze on the foreman without flinching. "He isn't mean. He's scared. I've seen him in my dreams." The words carried like a spark across dry grass. Even Buck, ready with another laugh, held his tongue. The ranch fell silent. Cole felt a strange tightening in his chest. Dreams. The boy's eyes did not waver, his voice did not falter. He spoke not as a child telling stories, but as someone stating a truth he had lived. Cole studied him, searching his small face for deception. "What's your name, son?" "Noah Reyes," the boy said simply. Marisol stepped forward then, her eyes soft but intent. "Cole? Look at him." Cole did look, and what he saw unsettled him more than Tempest's fury ever had. Determination burned in Noah's gaze, a quiet certainty that was both fearless and fragile. It reminded him of something long buried, a reflection of himself when he was young and reckless enough to believe he could bend the will of the wild with nothing but patience and heart. "You don't understand," Cole said, forcing his voice back into iron. "That horse is dangerous. Even the best cowboys in Texas couldn't break him." "I'm not going to break him," Noah replied. "I'm going to talk to him." The ranch hands stirred in disbelief, but Cole silenced them with a raised hand. He stared at Noah for a long moment, torn between sense and something deeper, something older. Logic told him to send the boy home at once, to protect him from the danger he could not possibly comprehend. Yet instinct whispered of fate, of doors opening at the last possible moment. "Please, sir," Noah said again, his voice quiet but unshakable. "One try. If it does not work, I will leave. You will never hear from me again." The boy's plea struck Cole like a hammer to stone. The air seemed charged, every man waiting for his word. At last, he exhaled slowly. "All right, Noah, but only on my terms. I will stand with you. Diego will keep the gate open. At the first sign of danger, you run. Do you understand?" Noah's face lit with a sudden smile that pierced the gloom. "Yes, sir." Deal Cole did not smile. His gut tightened as he gestured toward the paddock. "Diego, open the gate." The foreman hesitated. "Boss, this is madness." "Do it," Cole snapped, his voice sharp enough to slice through doubt. Diego obeyed, the latch clinking open with a sound that seemed to echo across the land. The gate swung wide, and Noah stepped forward. His small boots crunched softly against the dust. The boy moved without fear, his steps steady, his eyes fixed on the great beast that awaited him. Tempest noticed at once. His ears flicked back, muscles bunching beneath his gleaming coat, nostrils flaring as he caught the new scent. His head rose high, and the ground trembled faintly under his hooves as he shifted. The ranch held its breath, bracing for the inevitable explosion. But Noah stopped just inside the fence, still a safe distance away, and stood very still. "Hey there," Noah said, his voice calm, carrying on the morning air. "I came to see you." Every man strained to hear the words, though they were not for them, they were for Tempest alone. The stallion's ears pricked forward, his tail lashed once, and then he stood motionless, watching. Noah took a slow step closer. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. "You don't have to fight." Cole's breath caught. Never once had he seen Tempest stand so still. The stallion's chest heaved once and twice, as if considering, as if weighing this fragile boy against all the battles he had fought. Noah took another step, then another, his hand slowly rising. The world seemed to narrow into that single moment. The boy, the horse. The space between them shrinks with each breath. Tempest lowered his head slightly, ears tilting forward. Noah stretched out his hand, fingers trembling not with fear but with anticipation. And then, impossibly, Tempest leaned forward. His muzzle brushed the boy's small hand. Gasps broke across the yard. Diego cursed under his breath. Buck muttered, "Sweet Lord above." Marisol pressed her hand to her lips, tears brimming in her eyes. Cole could only stare, his heart hammering in his chest. Against all reason, against all expectations, the storm had stalled. The boy who spoke of dreams had touched the untouchable. And in that moment, Cole knew with bone-deep certainty that fate had not yet spoken its last word. The moment stretched longer than breath, longer than reason. Noah's small hand rested against the warm muzzle of Tempest, and the stallion did not strike. Instead, he stood perfectly still, ears twitching as if every syllable of the boy's whispered words carried meaning deeper than language. Dust motes swirled in the air between them, golden in the morning light, and for the first time since he had set hoof on Red Mesa, Tempest looked less like a storm and more like a secret waiting to be revealed. The ranch hands, hardened men who had seen creatures rise and fall, stood spellbound. Diego muttered a prayer under his breath, crossing himself as though he had just witnessed a miracle. Buck's jaw tightened, his pride battling disbelief, but even he could not deny what lay before his eyes. Marisol's tears slid silently down her cheeks, hands clasped against her heart, for she had always believed fate moved in strange and mysterious ways. Cole felt the air thick in his lungs. He had braced himself for chaos, for a charge, for blood. But none of it came. Instead, he saw something he could not explain, something that unsettled his very soul. A child had achieved what the strongest of men could not. Cole had always trusted skill, patience, and discipline. Now he stood face to face with something beyond any of those. Noah stroked Tempest's muzzle gently, murmuring words no one else could hear. The stallion's nostrils flared, his breath hot against the boy's hand. But his body remained calm. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, Tempest lowered his great head until it nearly touched Noah's chest. The boy wrapped both arms around the stallion's face, holding him not with ropes or reins, but with trust alone. Gasps escaped from the men at the fence. Diego whispered, "Impossible." Buck shook his head as though he could chase the truth away. But Cole knew what he saw. The impossible had just become real. The stillness was shattered with sudden noise. From the road came the frantic rattle of bicycle tires and the sound of a voice calling in desperation. "Noah! Noah!" Everyone turned as a woman, gray-haired and breathless, pedaled furiously toward the paddock. Her skirts flared in the wind, her face stricken with panic. She leapt from the bike before it had stopped and ran to the fence, nearly stumbling in her haste. "Get out of there this instant!" she cried, her voice trembling with both fear and command. Tempest shied at the sudden intrusion, stepping back sharply, but he did not rear or attack. He only tossed his head, eyes rolling with uncertainty. Noah turned toward the voice, his hands still resting on the stallion. "It's all right, Grandma," he said softly. "He likes me." The woman reached the fence, panting hard, her hands gripping the rails as if they were the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes flicked to Cole, and for a heartbeat, she froze. The color drained from her face. "Cole Ramirez," she whispered, her voice thin as if she had seen a ghost. Cole blinked, startled. He studied her face, trying to place her. There was something familiar in her eyes, but the years had carved lines that blurred memory. "Do we know each other?" he asked, confusion and suspicion warring within him. She did not answer immediately. Her gaze darted back to Noah, then to Tempest, and finally back to Cole. "Get out, Noah," she said firmly, her voice lower now but still carrying the weight of urgency. "Please, Grandma," Noah protested. "Just a little longer. He trusts me." "No," she snapped, though her eyes glistened with fear and something else, something unspoken. "Come here now." With reluctance, Noah stepped away from Tempest. The stallion snorted, following him a few paces as if unwilling to let him go. The boy slipped through the open gate, and Diego swung it shut in one swift motion. The spell was broken, yet its residue lingered in the stunned silence that followed. Cole approached the woman slowly, curiosity gnawing at him. "Are you the boy's grandmother?" "Yes," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. "I am." Lila Parker Cole tasted the name on his tongue, still uncertain why it struck some long-buried chord. "How did you know about the horse?" Lila hesitated. "News travels fast in a small town. People talk when there is trouble on a ranch like yours." Her words were plausible, yet something in her tone felt rehearsed, as if she were concealing a truth too sharp to release. Cole studied her carefully, his instincts prickling. He had learned long ago that men and women alike carried secrets, and this woman's secret was written plainly across her face. "Your grandson has a gift," Cole said at last, his voice slow and measured. "I have never seen anything like it." Lila's lips pressed thin. She took Noah by the shoulders and began guiding him toward the bicycle. "He has always been that way, with animals, ever since he was small." "Grandma," Noah protested, looking back longingly at Tempest. "Can I come tomorrow to see him again?" "No," Lila said sharply. "We cannot come here again." "But why?" the boy asked, his voice breaking with disappointment. "Because we have other things to do," she replied. But her eyes flickered toward Cole, and in that look he saw the truth. It was not errands that kept them away. It was fear. Cole's chest tightened. He wanted to demand answers, to force her to explain why the sight of him had shaken her so deeply, but something held him back. Instead, he nodded slowly, though his mind raced. "If the boy wishes to return, he will always be welcome," he said. "That is kind of you," Lila murmured, her voice unsteady. "But it will not be possible." And with that, she guided Noah back to the rusted bicycle. The boy climbed onto the seat, casting one last aching glance at Tempest, who stood at the fence, ears pricked, as if waiting for the boy to return. Then the bicycle rattled away down the dirt road, leaving the yard silent and bewildered. Diego broke the stillness with a low whistle. "Boss," he muttered, "I do not believe what I just saw." "Unbelievable," Cole finished for him, though his voice carried no triumph. Instead, it trembled with something deeper, recognition perhaps, or dread. From the porch, Marisol came to his side, her eyes thoughtful. "Did you see her face, Cole?" she asked quietly. "The way she looked at you?" "I did," he admitted. "It was as if she knew me." "And the boy," Marisol continued softly. "There was something familiar in him, too." Cole stared down the road where the pair had vanished, his heart heavy with questions he could not yet ask. Tempest let out a low, mournful nicker from the paddock, and the sound struck him like a plea. "No," Cole said finally, his voice grim but uncertain. "Dr. Patel will not be needed today. We will give the horse more time." As he turned away, he could not shake the feeling that fate had just taken the reins of his life, steering him toward a revelation he was not prepared to face. The days that followed were heavy with a strange quiet. Tempest no longer reared or charged at the sight of men, yet he no longer paced the paddock with the fury that once defined him. Instead, he lingered near the fence, his head tilted toward the road, as though waiting for a figure that never returned. The ranch hands whispered among themselves, unnerved by the change. Diego swore the stallion was mourning. Buck scoffed, though his laughter rang hollow. Cole did not laugh at all. He felt the truth of it in his bones. Tempest was waiting for the boy. Every evening, Cole caught himself drifting to the paddock, staring at the chestnut horse as the sun sank behind the hills. He saw the stallion lift his head at every distant sound, ears pricked, muscles quivering, hope flickering in his eyes, before fading again into stillness. And with each passing day, Cole's unease deepened. The image of Lila Parker's pale face haunted him. The way she had spoken his name, trembling as though it carried more weight than it should, unsettled him. He tried to dismiss it, to bury it in work, but questions gnawed at him like wolves at a carcass. On the 5th day, Cole saddled his truck and told Marisol he had errands to run in town. She studied him with knowing eyes but asked no questions. She had always understood when he needed silence more than words. He drove the dusty road toward the small town that had been both a lifeline and witness to Red Mesa's struggles for decades. As the familiar buildings came into view, their brick and wood worn by sun and years, he felt the pull of something inevitable. He began at Ortega's Bakery, a narrow shop with windows fogged by the constant heat of fresh bread. The scent of cinnamon and yeast wrapped around him as he pushed open the door. Old Joe Ortega, broad and cheerful despite his age, looked up from behind the counter. "Cole Ramirez," Joe greeted, wiping flour from his hands. "What brings you down from the ranch? Thought you'd be knee-deep in cattle this time of year." Cole gave a thin smile. "I need some answers, Joe. Do you know a woman named Lila Parker? Gray hair, about 60. She has a grandson, a boy called Noah." Joe frowned, brow furrowing in thought. "Parker, you say? Doesn't ring a bell, but—" He tapped his chin. "There's a Margaret Sullivan over in Oakwood, a widow. Takes care of her grandson. Boy's about 8, skinny fella, always polite. Come in here to buy bread when they can afford it. Could that be who you mean?" Cole felt a spark of recognition ignite in his chest. Noah. The boy's name fit, But the last name is Sullivan, not Parker. He leaned on the counter. You're certain? Joe nodded. Sure as I'm standing here. Sweet boy, I love to talk about horses. Eyes light up every time he mentions them. Reminds me of when we were kids, dreaming of the rodeo. Cole thanked him and left the shop, his mind racing. Parker or Sullivan? Why the change? Lies always had roots, and he meant to dig until he found them. The Oakwood neighborhood lay at the edge of town, a modest stretch of dirt roads and weathered houses. The yards were small, but most were tended with care, flowers blooming in chipped pots and laundry lines strung between posts. Cole parked his truck outside a light blue house with peeling paint and a garden of marigolds blooming bravely by the fence. He sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, unsure of what words he would find when the door opened. Finally, he stepped out and knocked. The door creaked open, and there she was. Lila, or Margaret, stood framed in the doorway, her eyes widening with shock as they fell on him. For a moment, silence hung thick, broken only by the rustling of the marigolds in the wind. Mr. Ramirez, she said at last, her voice tight. What are you doing here? Cole removed his hat, his gaze steady. I came to thank your grandson. What he did for Tempest, I've never seen anything like it. But I also came because there are questions that need answering. Her hand tightened on the edge of the door, as though she might slam it shut, but she did not. Behind her, he glimpsed Noah's face peeking curiously from the shadows, his eyes lighting when he saw Cole. Mr. Ramirez, the boy cried, stepping forward. How's Tempest? Is he all right? He's fine, son, Cole said softly, offering a faint smile. In fact, he's calmer than I've ever seen him. He waits for you. Noah's eyes widened with joy, but Lila placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Go on to the back, Noah, she said gently but firmly. Play a while. I'll call you when it's time. The boy hesitated, then obeyed, disappearing into the backyard. Cole and Lila were left in the charged quiet of the doorway. He studied her lined face, searching for the truth. Why did you lie about your name? He asked quietly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't lie. Parker was my husband's name. Sullivan is mine. I use both. That's not the whole story, Cole said, his voice hardening. You knew me. I saw it in your eyes. When you said my name, it was not the way strangers speak. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a weary sigh, she stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. Some things, she said slowly, are better left buried. Cole felt his pulse quicken. Buried things have a way of clawing back up, he said. And right now, one of them is pawing the dirt in my paddock. That horse is tied to you somehow, and so is the boy. I want the truth. Margaret's eyes flicked away toward the marigolds bending in the wind. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a tremor. You really don't remember me, do you? Cole blinked, startled. He studied her again, searching her features for some hidden memory. She went on. I worked at your ranch long ago. 15 years back, I cleaned the main house. I was pregnant at the time. The words struck him like a blow. His mind scrambled through faded recollections, searching for a thread. He remembered faces, names, and workers who had come and gone. A young woman, yes, with quiet eyes and gentle hands. Pregnant, but how could this connect to now? And the child you carried, Cole said slowly, voice tight. What happened? Margaret's eyes shone with grief. That child grew up and had a daughter of her own. My daughter. Her name was Sophia. She worked on your ranch one summer when she was 17. She loved horses more than anything. She dreamed of training them. But life had other plans. She met someone, and from that summer came Noah. Cole felt the ground tilt beneath him, his chest constricting as the pieces began to shift into place. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Margaret looked at him with sorrow that seemed to reach through the years. Noah is my grandson, she whispered, and though he does not know it, he carries a story that binds him to you more than you realize. Cole stood frozen, the sounds of the town fading around him. The marigolds trembled in the wind, the air heavy with revelations unspoken, and he understood that the threads of fate were pulling tighter. The storm had only begun. The words Margaret had spoken lingered like thunder in Cole's mind. He had come to town seeking answers about a strange boy and a restless horse, but what he had uncovered was far heavier than anything he expected. The small blue house, the trembling marigolds, and Margaret's eyes lined with grief all pressed against him as though the past itself had clawed free from the soil. He returned to his truck without another word. Margaret had closed the door softly, firmly, as if sealing away everything she had revealed. Yet the truth clung to him. Sophia, a young woman who had worked on his ranch one summer, who had carried within her a love for horses so fierce that it seemed to echo in the boy who now spoke to Tempest, as though they shared one soul. Sophia had been Margaret's daughter, and Sophia had been Noah's mother. The road back to Red Mesa stretched long and lonely. Cole's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, as questions roared inside him. Who had Sophia loved that summer? Who was Noah's father? Why had Margaret looked at him as though the answer was carved into his own bloodline? He felt the unease gnawing at him, whispering that he was not merely an onlooker in this story, but a piece of it, bound whether he wished to be or not. When he reached the ranch, dusk had already draped the land in indigo shadows. Marisol waited on the porch, her eyes searching his face before he even stepped from the truck. She knew something had shifted. She always knew. "What did you find?" she asked quietly. Cole climbed the steps slowly, his body heavy with exhaustion, not of the flesh, but of the spirit. He sank into the porch chair and looked out toward the paddock, where Tempest stood motionless at the fence, watching the road once more. "Her name is Margaret Sullivan," Cole said at last. "She was Lila Parker when she came to the ranch, but that was her married name. She worked here years ago. Her daughter Sophia did too, when she was 17. And the boy, Noah, is Sophia's son." Marisol's breath caught. "And Sophia?" Cole's eyes lowered. "Gone. Margaret raised the boy after her death." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of the boards beneath their chairs. Marisol's fingers tightened around the armrest. "And the father?" she asked softly. Cole shook his head. "She didn't say. But there is more. The way Margaret looked at me, the way she spoke, Marisol shows something. Something that ties that boy and that horse to us more than we understand." Marisol turned her gaze to the paddock. Tempest's copper coat gleamed faintly under the rising moon. "You think fate has brought him here for a reason?" she murmured. Cole let out a long, ragged sigh. "I don't know what I think anymore. But I know this, the boy has a gift, and Tempest has chosen him. To separate them would be a cruelty I cannot carry." That night, Cole lay awake in the dark, listening to the distant calls of the coyotes and the restless stamping of Tempest in the paddock. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Noah's small hand resting against the stallion's muzzle. Every time he turned on his side, he saw Margaret's haunted face whispering of things better left buried. At dawn, he rose before the house stirred and walked to the paddock. Tempest was waiting at the fence, eyes fixed on the road, nostrils flaring with every breeze, as though searching for the scent of the boy. Cole rested a hand on the top rail and spoke softly, though he knew the horse could not answer. "Who are you really, Old Storm, and why does that boy carry the key to your heart?" The stallion flicked an ear, stepped closer, and pressed his muzzle against the wood, as though urging Cole to stop asking questions and start listening. By midday, Diego approached, his hat tilted low, his expression uneasy. "Boss," he said, scratching his jaw, "the men are restless. They don't understand why the vet ain't come. They say the boy's trick was a fluke. They're worried the temperature will turn again." Cole straightened, his eyes hard. "Tempest stays. Until I say otherwise, if any man has a problem with that, he can collect his pay and be gone." Diego nodded, though worry lingered in his eyes. He turned back toward the barns, leaving Cole alone once more with the weight of his decision. That evening, Marisol found him on the porch again. She set a hand on his shoulder and spoke softly. "If you believe the boy is meant to return, you must go to him. Do not wait for fate to do all the work. Sometimes it takes a step of courage to open the door destiny has already placed before you." Cole looked at her, her eyes calm and sure in the fading light. He nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow, I will go back." The next day, Cole drove once more into town, his resolve hard but his heart uneasy. The blue house waited, quiet, the marigolds still bowing in the breeze. He knocked, and after a long pause, Margaret opened the door. Her eyes narrowed, wary. "I told you," she said, voice firm. "Some things are better left buried." "I am not here to dig graves," Cole replied. "I am here for the boy. Tempest is waiting for him, and I will not see a creature pine away for a chance at salvation when it stands right before us." Margaret's jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," Cole pressed, his voice rising. "Tell me why you fear what is plain as the sun. That boy and that horse share something none of us can deny. And you," he paused, searching her face, "you know why." Margaret's shoulders sagged, and for the first time her eyes glistened with tears. "You want the truth, Cole Ramirez? Then listen. Sophia loved someone she should not have. She loved a man whose blood runs through your family, and Noah is the proof of it." The world tilted once more, the air heavy and still. Cole's heart pounded as if it would break through his chest. He gripped the doorframe to steady himself. "What are you saying?" he whispered. "I am saying," Margaret breathed, her voice shaking, "that Noah is not just my grandson. He is yours too. He is the grandson of Red Mesa Ranch." Cole staggered back, the ground trembling beneath him. The truth, raw and undeniable, surged through his veins like wildfire. Noah's eyes, Noah's gift, the boy's connection to Tempest, all of it made sense now. Margaret's tears fell freely, but her voice steadied. "Now you know why I tried to keep him away. Because once this truth comes out, nothing will ever be the same again." And standing there in the fading light, Cole knew she was right. Nothing would ever be the same. Cole staggered from Margaret's doorway, with the weight of her revelation pressing against his chest like an anvil. The town's narrow street blurred before his eyes, and the voices of passing neighbors were nothing but distant echoes. He reached his truck on unsteady legs and gripped the doorframe, his breath ragged, his heart beating, not with the steady rhythm of a seasoned rancher, but with the confusion of a man whose past had just erupted from the grave. The drive back to Red Mesa was silent save for the growl of the engine and the gravel crunching beneath the tires. His mind was no longer in the present. It was pulled backward into memories he had not visited in years. Long summer days when Sophia had walked the ranch grounds with her bright eyes and boundless dreams, her laughter mingling with the neighing of young colts. She had been so young, only 17. Yet her passion for horses rivaled even his own. He remembered now how she had lingered near the corrals, how her gaze had always sought out his son, Gabriel, who at 20 had already shown a knack for training that outshone men twice his age. Margaret's words rang clear in his mind. "Noah is not just my grandson. He is yours, too." By the time Cole pulled into the yard, dusk had gathered once more. Tempest stood near the paddock fence, his silhouette dark against the setting sun. The stallion lifted his head, ears pricking, as if sensing the turmoil storming inside the man who now walked toward him. Cole placed a hand on the fence rail, staring into the horse's dark eyes. "Is it true?" he whispered hoarsely, though he knew Tempest could not answer. "Is that boy the blood of my blood?" The stallion snorted, pawing at the earth as though impatient with human riddles. But in the tilt of his head and the calmness in his gaze, Cole saw the reflection of Noah's touch, the same piece the boy had drawn from chaos. And in that reflection, the truth pressed heavier on his chest. Marisol found him still standing there when the stars began to scatter across the sky. She touched his shoulder gently, her eyes searching for him. "What did she tell you?" Cole turned to her, his voice raw. "That Noah is our grandson." Her hand flew to her lips. She stared at him breathless. "Gabriel?" Cole nodded once, the name breaking from him like a confession. "It must have been. Sophia loved him, and Margaret said the boy is of our blood." Marisol sank onto the porch step, her eyes glistening. "And Gabriel never knew?" "No," Cole said firmly. "He left for college before Sophia discovered. She never told him, and Margaret, she carried the secret all these years." Silence held them both. The wind stirred dry leaves along the yard, and Tempest shifted in the distance, his tail swishing slowly. The enormity of what they had learned settled heavily, pressing down like the weight of the whole Texas sky. At dawn, Cole called Diego and Buck into the barn. Their faces were wary, expecting, perhaps, the order they had dreaded, to put Tempest down after all. But instead, Cole's voice rang clear. The horse stays, and the boy will return. Whatever it takes, I will see it done. Diego tilted his head, skeptical. You trust a child with a beast that nearly killed me? I trust what I saw, Cole said, his voice like iron. Tempest has chosen him, and blood calls to blood. The men exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing more. They knew when their boss had made up his mind. That afternoon, Cole drove back to Oakwood. The blue house stood quiet, the marigolds nodding in the wind. He knocked once, twice, before Margaret appeared. Her expression was tight, her lips pressed as if she had expected him. You should not be here, she said. I must be, Cole replied. You cannot keep him from telling the truth. He has a right to know, and the horse has a right to him. Margaret's eyes flickered with pain. You do not understand what it will do to him. He has grown up believing his father abandoned him, to learn that he was never even told, that he has a family who knew nothing of him. It will wound him deeper. Then let me heal that wound, Cole said, his voice trembling but steady. He deserves more than silence. He deserves a place in the family he belongs to. Before Margaret could answer, Noah's voice rang out from the backyard. Grandma, who is it? He appeared, his eyes lighting when he saw Cole. Mr. Ramirez, how's Tempest? Does he still wait? Cole's throat tightened, but he managed a smile. He waits, son. He waits every hour of the day. Noah's face glowed with joy, and he rushed forward. Can I see him again? Please? Margaret closed her eyes briefly, torn, before finally whispering, once. But I will come too. And so it was that the boy returned to Red Mesa. The moment the truck pulled into the yard, Tempest let out a cry so loud and wild it echoed across the hills. Noah leapt from the truck before it fully stopped, running toward the paddock, and Tempest met him at the fence with a whinny that shook the air. The boy pressed his small hands to the stallion's muzzle, and the horse leaned into him like a long-lost friend. The ranch hands stood stunned once more. Diego crossed himself again. Buck muttered under his breath, and Marisol, watching from the porch, wiped silent tears from her cheeks. Cole turned to Margaret, his voice low. Do you see? Whatever storm lies behind us, this bond cannot be denied. Margaret's face was pale, her eyes wet. Yes, she whispered. I see. But Cole knew the hardest part was still ahead. The boy did not yet know the truth of his blood, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Gabriel, his son, Noah's father, lived unaware that a child bore his name in his veins. The storm was gathering, and Cole felt its weight pressing down. Tempest had returned with fury, but Noah had stilled the storm. Now it would fall to Cole to decide whether the boy would face the truth of his bloodlines, and whether Gabriel would finally be told of the son he never knew existed. The days that followed Noah's return to Red Mesa Ranch were filled with a strange electricity, as though the very air had grown aware that something greater than any of them was building just beyond sight. The boy came every afternoon after school riding in the passenger seat of Margaret's weathered truck. Each time Tempest met him at the fence before the engine had even cooled, his whinny echoing through the valley like a song of recognition. The stallion would lower his proud head and press against the boy's chest as if no time had passed between their last meeting and this one. Cole watched from the porch each day, his weathered face betraying nothing, though inside he was torn apart. Every gesture, every laugh, every touch between boy and horse carved the truth deeper into him. This was not a mere chance. Blood called to blood, and the bond between Noah and Tempest carried the echo of Gabriel's own youth when Cole's son had first learned the language of horses. Gabriel had once looked at wild colts with that same light in his eyes, the same quiet courage that believed storms could be tamed with patience rather than force. Marisol, ever the quiet compass of the ranch, said little at first. But one evening, as they sat together while the cicadas sang from the trees, she broke her silence. You cannot keep it hidden, Cole. The boy deserves to know who he is, and Gabriel deserves to know he has a son. Cole's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the last of the light bled into purple shadow. I know, he admitted, but once the truth is spoken, nothing will be the same. Margaret is right about that. Nothing is the same already, Marisol answered softly. Look at that horse. Look at that boy. The storm has already broken. We are only pretending we do not feel the rain. Her words cut straight to his core. The next morning, Cole drove into town on the pretense of feeding supplies. In truth, he needed space to think. He found himself parked outside the Oakwood churchyard, where the graves of those long gone lay beneath crooked stones and wildflowers. He walked among them slowly, his boots scuffing the dry earth, until he came to the smaller plots near the edge. There, freshly carved and still unweathered, was the stone of Sophia Sullivan. Beloved daughter, devoted mother. Cole stood for a long while, his hat in his hand, his head bowed. "You left a piece of yourself behind," he whispered, his voice rough, and he found his way to me. "I swear to you, Sophia, I will not fail him, not the way the world failed you." When he returned to the ranch that evening, he found Noah brushing Tempest's mane with quiet concentration, while Margaret stood nearby, her posture stiff. She greeted Cole with a guarded nod, her eyes watching him carefully. Later, when Noah ran off to fetch water, she approached. "You've been thinking," she said flatly. "Yes," Cole replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "You mean to tell him?" "I mean to tell Gabriel first," Cole said firmly, "then the boy. Secrets rot when they're left too long in the dark. It is time." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "You will break him. You will tear apart the only life he has known." "I will give him the life he was meant to have," Cole countered. "And I will give Gabriel the truth he never knew." Margaret's eyes glistened, but her voice hardened. "If you do this, you will also give him pain. Do not pretend otherwise." Cole said nothing. The truth of her words burned, but it did not change what had to be done. That night, the ranch was quiet, the moon casting pale light over the corrals. Cole stood once more at Tempest's paddock, the stallion shifting restlessly, as though sensing the tension that rippled through the air. Noah had already gone home, and without him Tempest seemed incomplete, like a storm cloud waiting for the strike of lightning. Cole rested his hands on the fence rail. "Storms cannot be held forever," he murmured to the horse. "Sooner or later, they break." And as if in answer, a low roll of thunder echoed faintly from the far hills, though the sky above remained clear and star-filled. It was an omen, Cole thought grimly, a silence before the storm. The morning sun stretched pale gold fingers across Red Mesa Ranch, bathing the land in deceptive calm. Yet, inside Cole, the storm he had feared for days had already begun. The truth weighed on him with every breath, the knowledge that his son Gabriel lived unaware of the boy who carried his blood. Marisol watched him pace the porch, his boots wearing grooves into the wood. She said nothing, letting his silence unravel at its own pace. But her presence was steady as the mountains. By noon, Margaret and Noah arrived. The boy leapt from the truck before its wheels had stilled, racing toward Tempest's paddock. The stallion answered with a whinny so powerful it seemed to shake the earth. Noah pressed himself against the horse's muzzle, whispering words only Tempest could hear. And once again the two of them seemed to fold into a world apart. Cole's heart clenched. He saw Gabriel in that boy. The tilt of his chin, the stubborn set of his shoulders, the quiet confidence that animals trusted instinctively, and with each resemblance came the sting of memory, sharper than barbed wire. He could no longer deny what Margaret had said. When Noah disappeared into the barn to fetch a brush, Cole turned to Margaret. "I am writing to Gabriel," he said firmly. "He must know." Margaret's face tightened, her eyes flashing with something between sorrow and fury. "Do you think you will ease the boy's life by digging up what was buried? Gabriel will not welcome this truth. He has his world far away from here. You risk tearing apart what little peace Noah has left." Cole's jaw hardened. Peace built on lies is no peace at all. Marisol, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Margaret, you are afraid because you know love binds as much as it wounds. But Noah already aches with questions, and Gabriel, he deserves the chance to choose what kind of father he will be." Margaret turned her face away, her voice trembling. And what if he chooses to walk away? What then? Noah will lose everything twice over. Cole's voice dropped low, fierce with conviction. Then I will not let him stand alone. He is family, mine, yours, and whether Gabriel accepts him or not, Noah will never again be without a name to call his own. For a long time Margaret said nothing. The wind carried the scent of dust and horses, and Tempest snorted impatiently as if demanding an end to the argument. At last Margaret whispered, "If you must, then write. But know this, Cole Ramirez, once his name is spoken, it cannot be unsaid." That night, Cole sat at the kitchen table beneath the dim glow of a single lamp. The house was still, Marisol asleep upstairs, and the dogs were silent on the porch. He took a sheet of paper and stared at its blank expanse, his pen heavy in his calloused hand. How could a man compress 8 years of silence into words? How could he tell his son that a child lived beneath the same sun, bearing his eyes, his blood, his legacy? The pen scratched slowly across the page. He told Gabriel of Sophia, of the boy she left behind, of the stallion that had bound them together again. He wrote not as a rancher or a father demanding obedience, but as a man pleading for truth. When the ink dried, his hand trembled as he folded the letter, sealing within it the storm that would soon break across all their lives. He set the envelope aside and blew out the lamp. In the darkness he whispered to the night, "Gabriel, my son, come home. The past has found us." Outside, in the paddock, Tempest stamped his hooves and lifted his head toward the moon, as though he too knew that the silence was nearly at its end. The letter weighed heavily in Cole's pocket like a stone chained to his heart. For days he carried it, unsure whether to mail it or to burn it. Each night he walked the porch beneath the stars, Marisol's gentle eyes urging him to follow through, Margaret's warnings echoing against his resolve. The world outside remained deceptively calm. Cattle lowing in the pastures, crickets humming in the tall grass, but within the walls of Red Mesa Ranch, a reckoning waited. When Cole finally placed the envelope in the post, his hand shook. He watched the mailman's truck vanish down the dusty road and whispered, "Now it begins." For once, the decision no longer rested in his hands. Fate had been set loose, and it would travel north to wherever Gabriel lived, carrying with it the truth he could no longer keep hidden. The following days stretched long, each one filled with restless anticipation. Noah continued to come to the ranch, his laughter spilling across the paddocks as he brushed Tempest or ran with the dogs. The boy spoke often of dreams, teaching Tempest tricks, maybe riding him bareback through the open fields one day. Cole listened quietly, torn between pride and sorrow. He longed to tell Noah everything, to kneel before him and say, "You are mine," but the time had not yet come. Margaret, for her part, grew more silent. She stood by the fence each visit, her eyes following Noah with love but shadowed by worry. Sometimes Cole caught her watching him instead, her gaze hard as iron, as though daring him to regret the path he had chosen. He did not flinch under her stare. The truth had already left his hands. On the 7th evening after the letter had been sent, a truck rumbled up the long road to Red Mesa. The sound carried across the valley, pulling every pair of eyes toward the horizon. Dust billowed behind the vehicle, lit red by the sinking sun. Cole's chest tightened. Marisol, standing beside him on the porch, reached for his arm. The truck stopped before the house. Out stepped Gabriel. He looked older than Cole remembered, lines etched into his brow from years of study and work in the city. But his eyes, those sharp, determined eyes, were the same as when he was a boy. He carried himself with a mixture of hesitation and urgency, like a man who had driven all night with a question he could not silence. "Dad," Gabriel said, his voice thick. Cole's throat constricted. "You came." "I had to." Gabriel's hand trembled as he held up the crumpled letter. "Tell me it's true. Tell me I have a son." Before Cole could answer, the barn doors creaked open. Noah emerged, leading Tempest by the halter, the horse calm at his side. The boy spotted Gabriel and paused, confusion flickering across his young face. Margaret stiffened where she stood by the paddock, her breath sharp as a blade. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable. Then Cole stepped forward, his voice breaking but sure. "Yes, Gabriel, it is true. This boy, this is Noah, your son." The words fell like thunder. Noah froze, his small hand tightening on the halter. Gabriel's eyes widened, filling with shock, disbelief, and a grief that seemed to hollow him from within. "My son?" he whispered, as though the words themselves might shatter if spoken too loud. Noah looked between them, his voice small, uncertain. "Mr. Ramirez, what does he mean?" The ranch held its breath. The storm had broken, and nothing could hold back what was to come. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The only sounds were the restless shuffling of Tempest's hooves and the ragged breaths of the 3 generations caught in a single truth. Noah's eyes darted from Cole to Gabriel, confusion flooding his young face. His grip on the halter tightened, as though the stallion were his anchor in a storm too great for him to understand. Gabriel's chest rose and fell rapidly. His lips parted, closed, then parted again, words refusing to come. All his life, he had been a man of plans and precision, a veterinary mind trained to find order in chaos. But here was chaos, and no education could tame. His son, his flesh and blood, stood before him 8 years old, his existence hidden behind silence and fear. "Tell me," Gabriel finally managed, his voice breaking, "tell me how this is possible." "How could I not know?" Margaret stiffened at the paddock, her hand trembling as she gripped the fence rail. "Because Sophia never told you," she said quietly. Her voice carried sorrow, but also steel. She was afraid. Afraid you would turn away, afraid Cole would judge, afraid of shame that wasn't hers to carry. She bore it alone. Gabriel turned to her, his eyes ablaze. "And you let her. You let her carry it while I lived blind." Margaret's chin lifted, tears glistening in her eyes. "I let her because she begged me to. She wanted to protect you as much as she wanted to protect him. She died with that secret still locked inside her." Silence thickened. Noah shifted uneasily, his young voice piercing the weight around them. "Someone tell me what's happening." "Who are you?" He looked at Gabriel, his brow furrowed. "Why does he keep staring at me like that?" Cole stepped forward, his weathered face softened by grief. He laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Because, Noah," he said gently, "that man is your father." The words landed heavily. Noah blinked, stunned, his lips trembling as though he could not decide whether to speak or run. He looked at Gabriel, then at Margaret, then back at Cole. "My father? But Grandma always said my father left before I was born." Margaret's tears finally spilled. "I lied to shield you," she admitted. "He never left. He never even knew." The boy staggered back a step, his hand loosening on Tempest's halter. The stallion sensed the shift, pressing his massive head against Noah's chest, steadying him. Noah buried his face in the horse's mane, his small shoulders quivering. Gabriel's voice broke again, rough with anguish. "I never knew, Noah. If I had, I would have been here from the start, I swear it." He took a tentative step closer but stopped when the boy shrank back, pressing tighter to Tempest. Cole's voice rumbled low, steadying the storm. "Give him time, Gabriel. The truth is heavy. He needs to carry it in his own way." That night, the ranch lay under a blanket of silence broken only by the restless pacing of Tempest in the paddock. Noah refused to leave the stallion's side, curling against the fence as if proximity to the horse might shield him from the truths swirling around him. Margaret sat nearby, whispering prayers into the night. Gabriel, torn between longing and guilt, stood apart, watching his son with eyes that could not close. Cole sat with Marisol on the porch, his hands clasped, his shoulders bowed. "I've unleashed the storm," he whispered. Marisol rested her hand over his. "Storms tear, but they also cleanse. This was never yours to hold forever, Cole. It was always going to break. Now it has." Cole nodded slowly, though the weight did not lift. He stared across the yard at Noah, at Gabriel, at the fragile thread of family straining to hold under the storm's pressure. And in his heart, he prayed that when the silence shattered fully, love would be strong enough to bind them together again. The dawn broke gray and thin over Red Mesa Ranch, the kind of sky that carried no promise of warmth. Dew clung to the grass, and the paddocks lay cloaked in mist. The house was silent except for the faint creak of floorboards as Gabriel paced inside. He had not slept, his mind circling endlessly around the same words, "My son." From the porch, Cole watched him through the window, his own heart heavy with memories of when Gabriel was Noah's age. He saw the same restlessness, the same storm in his blood that could not be stilled. But now the storm was guilt and confusion, not the wild ambition of youth. Noah had refused to come inside the night before. He had stayed with Tempest, curled against the stallion's flank, whispering soft words into the animal's mane. At some point, Margaret had wrapped a blanket around him, sitting nearby with her back straight, as though her silent presence might shield him from the weight of everything revealed. When morning came, Noah was the first to stir. He stood, his hair damp with dew, his small hands brushing Tempest's coat. Gabriel stepped out onto the porch then, his boots crunching softly on gravel. His eyes sought the boy, hesitant, aching. "Noah," Gabriel said, his voice hoarse, as if speaking his name cost him something. The boy froze, then turned slowly. His eyes were wary, mistrust shadowing the light that once danced there. He studied Gabriel with a quiet intensity, as though trying to see whether the man's face truly mirrored his own. "You're my father," Noah said, the words sharp and uncertain, as if testing their shape on his tongue. Gabriel swallowed hard. "Yes, I never knew Noah. If I had, nothing would have kept me away." "But you weren't here," the boy said simply, his tone neither accusing nor forgiving, only stating the raw truth. Gabriel's breath shuddered. He stepped closer but not too close, keeping space between them as if the distance itself were fragile. "I cannot change the years I missed, but I can change what comes next, if you'll let me." Noah's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do I know you won't leave again?" The question pierced through Gabriel's chest like a blade. He lowered himself to one knee, bringing his eyes level with the boy's. "Because I've already lost too much. I won't lose you, Ooh. If you'll give me the chance, I will prove it every day." Tempest shifted then, pressing his head against Noah's shoulder as though urging him to listen. The boy stroked the horse's muzzle, silent, thoughtful. Finally he said softly, "Tempest believes you. I'll wait and see if I can too." Gabriel's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. "That's more than I deserve." Margaret stepped forward, her face etched with pain but also with fierce protectiveness. "He is still my grandson," she said, her voice steady. "I raised him. Do not think you can sweep in and claim what you abandoned." "I never abandoned him," Gabriel said, his voice trembling with both anger and grief. "I never knew. You chose silence. You chose me." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes wavered. "I chose to protect him from disappointment." Cole stepped between them then, his presence carrying the authority of decades. "Enough," he said, his voice like thunder rolling across the valley. "The boy does not need a battlefield. He needs a family. Whatever grudges you carry, bury them. From this day forward, Noah's life will not be defined by secrets or quarrels. It will be defined by love." The words settled heavily in the air. Margaret's eyes glistened, Gabriel's shoulders sagged, and Noah clung to Tempest, as though the horse was the only anchor that made sense. Later that evening, after supper had passed in uneasy silence, Cole found Noah outside once more, seated beneath the old cottonwood tree, where the lantern light had not reached. The boy sat cross-legged, carving lines into the dirt with a stick. Tempest grazed nearby, his copper coat gleaming faintly under the moon. Cole lowered himself beside the boy, his old bones protesting. "You remind me of someone," he said gently. "Who?" Noah asked without looking up. "My son," Cole answered softly. "When he was your age, he sat right here and told me he wanted to heal every wounded horse in Texas. He had that same fire in his eyes. You carry it too." Noah's small hand stilled. "Do you think he really wants me, or is he just saying it?" Cole placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Blood does not lie, Noah, but more than blood, I see the way he looks at you. He wants you. He just doesn't know how to show it yet. Give him time. He is learning what it means to be a father, in the same way you are learning what it means to be a son." Noah turned then, his eyes searching Cole's face. "And what does that make you?" Cole smiled faintly, his voice thick. "It makes me your grandfather. If you'll have me." The boy's lips trembled, and then slowly he leaned against Cole, his head resting against the old man's chest. "I think I already do." Cole wrapped his arm around him, staring out across the paddocks where Tempest raised his head to the stars. In that moment, the ranchmaster felt something he had not felt in years. Not triumph, not control, but the fragile, burning hope that perhaps the ashes of silence could indeed be built into a bridge strong enough to carry them all into tomorrow. The weeks after the revelation unfolded like a fragile dawn, each day bringing a little more clarity yet carrying shadows that lingered at the edges. Red Mesa Ranch breathed differently now. Where once it had been merely the home of horses and cattle, it had become the crucible of a family reforged from silence, guilt, and unexpected love. Noah still carried questions in his eyes. He often moved through the paddocks with Tempest at his side, silent for longer stretches than before, his small face carved with thought. Gabriel followed him with care, learning when to step close and when to let the boy drift into his own space. There were awkward conversations, moments of hurt, but also the first flickers of something deeper, trust beginning to stretch tentative roots through fractured soil. One morning, Cole found Gabriel sitting alone in the barn, repairing a bridle with clumsy hands that had grown too used to city life. The younger man's shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. "You're working leather like a man trying to fix more than a strap," Cole said, his voice calm. Gabriel gave a short laugh, bitter at the edges. "How do you build something when the foundation was never there?" Cole studied him, the boy who was now a man, the man who was now a father. "You build it slowly, nail by nail, and when it creaks, you don't abandon it, you reinforce it. Noah doesn't need perfection. He needs presence." Gabriel lowered his head, nodding slowly. "Presence, I can do that." Outside, Noah's laughter suddenly rang clear. Gabriel rose and walked toward it, drawn as if by gravity. Cole remained behind, whispering a prayer he had carried in his heart for years, that his son would find the strength to give the boy what he himself had struggled to offer when Gabriel was young. As spring turned to summer, Red Mesa began to heal. Margaret, though still protective, softened in time. She would sit on the porch sewing while Noah played with the ranch dogs, and though her eyes often strayed toward Gabriel with caution, they no longer burned with accusation. She began to see not only the man who had been absent, but the man trying desperately to be present. One evening, as the sky painted itself in amber and violet, Gabriel approached her quietly. "Thank you," he said simply, "for raising him, for giving him a world when I wasn't there." He too, Margaret's hand stilled on her sewing. Her voice trembled when she answered, "I only did what any grandmother would. But now it's your turn, do not fail him." "I won't," Gabriel promised, and for the first time, Margaret believed him. The turning point came one Sunday morning when Noah stood in the arena, reins in hand, preparing to ride Tempest bareback for the first time. The ranch hands gathered, some with worry, some with awe. Gabriel hovered close, his every muscle taut, but Noah's voice was steady as he stroked the stallion's neck. "You carried storms," Noah whispered to Tempest. "Now carry me." With a smooth leap he mounted, and Tempest moved forward as though the boy's weight were an extension of his own spirit. Together they circled the arena, the stallion's hooves drumming a rhythm that echoed across the valley. Dust rose around them like a halo, sunlight piercing through in golden shafts. When Noah dismounted, his smile was radiant, his eyes finally free of the shadows that had haunted him. He ran into Gabriel's arms, and for the first time, he did not hold back. Gabriel clutched him tightly, his tears falling freely, the bond between father and son sealed not by blood alone, but by choice. Cole stood with Marisol, his heart swelling. "The storm has passed," she whispered. "No," Cole replied softly, his eyes fixed on the boy and the stallion, on the man holding him close. "The storm has become our light." From that day, Red Mesa Ranch was no longer a place burdened by secrets, but a home bound by truth. Noah grew into his gift with horses, Gabriel into his role as father, Margaret into a guardian unafraid to share her love, and Cole into the grandfather he had longed to be. And through it all Tempest remained, a creature once untamable, now the living symbol of a family broken and remade, a storm transformed into the quiet strength of love enduring. The ranch breathed as one, and the echoes of blood and storm finally gave way to peace.